Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his cargo ship Wanderer into the docking bay of Nexus Station. The old station looked like a metal spider floating in space, with its many arms reaching out in all directions. Jake had been hauling cargo between the Outer Rim planets for 8 years now, and Nexus Station was one of his regular stops. It was not the prettiest place in the galaxy, but it had everything a cargo pilot needed, including cheap fuel and cheaper food. After securing his ship, Jake walked through the station corridors toward the market district. The halls were filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. Humans walked beside tall blue-skinned Andromedans, while small furry Kasari scurried between their legs carrying packages. The air smelled of exotic spices and engine oil. Jake loved the diversity of the Outer Rim, even if some of the characters here were not exactly trustworthy. He needed supplies for his next run to the mining colonies near the Vega system. His ship was running low on food rations, and he wanted to pick up some entertainment vids for the long journey ahead. The main market was busy as always with vendors, shouting about their wares in a dozen different languages. Jake made his way through the crowd, stopping at various stalls to buy what he needed. It was, while he was examining some protein bars at a food vendor, that he heard the commotion. Raised voices were coming from the darker section of the market, where the less legal business usually took place. Jake normally minded his own business in places like this, but something about the voices made him look up. One of them sounded desperate, and the other sounded mean. Jake finished his purchase and walked toward the noise. In a dim alley between two closed shops, he saw something that made his blood boil. A tall alien with gray skin and 4 arms was talking to a heavyset human in dirty coveralls. Between them stood 3 small children who were clearly not human. They had pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Oldest child was holding the hands of the 2 smaller ones, and all 3 looked terrified. The alien was swaying on his feet, and Jake could smell alcohol on him from several feet away. The human was counting credit chips in his palm, while looking at the children like they were cargo. Jake moved closer and heard enough of their conversation to understand what was happening. The alien was selling the children to the human in exchange for cases of synthetic alcohol. Jake felt sick. He had seen some terrible things in his years, traveling the Outer Rim, but this was worse than most. The oldest child, who looked to be about 10 years old, was trying to comfort the younger ones while tears ran down her face. She was speaking to them in a language Jake did not recognize, but her tone was gentle despite her obvious fear. The human, whose name seemed to be Pete Collins, was getting impatient. He grabbed the oldest child by the arm and started pulling her toward a nearby corridor. The alien, who Jake heard called Caltex, waved his hand dismissively and stumbled toward a bar with his payment. The other 2 children started crying and reaching for their sister. Jake could not stand by and watch this happen. He stepped out of the shadows and cleared his throat. Both Collins and the children looked at him with surprise. Collins let go of the girl and put his hand near the weapon on his belt. Jake was not a small man, and his years of military service had taught him how to look dangerous when he needed to. He kept his voice calm but firm as he spoke to Collins. He told him that taking children against their will was illegal even on Nexus Station, and that he should let them go. Immediately, Collins laughed and said the children had been sold to him fair and square. He said their father had every right to get rid of them if he wanted to. Jake looked at the drunk alien, who was now leaning against a wall, singing to himself. The man clearly did not care what happened to the children as long as he got his alcohol. Jake took a step closer to Collins and let his hand rest on his own weapon. He told Collins that he had contacts in station security and that trafficking charges would mean serious prison time. He also mentioned that he had recorded the entire transaction on his personal device, which was a lie, but Collins did not know that. The tension in the alley was thick. Collins looked at Jake, then at the children, then back at Jake. After a long moment, he spat on the ground and said the children were not worth the trouble. He walked away, muttering about interfering do-gooders, and disappeared into the crowd. Jake looked down at the 3 frightened children. They were huddled together, staring at him with those large, glowing eyes. The oldest one said something in her language that sounded like a question. Jake did not understand the words, but he could guess what she was asking. He knelt down to their level and spoke softly. He told them his name was Jake and that he was not going to hurt them. He asked if they spoke Standard, which was the common language used for trade throughout the galaxy. The oldest child nodded and said yes in heavily accented Standard. She pointed to herself and said her name was Zara. The middle child was Luna, and the youngest was Nova. Jake asked where their mother was, and Zara looked down at the ground. She said their mother had died 2 years ago, and that their father had been drinking more and more since then. She said he had been saying for weeks that he wanted to get rid of them, because they cost too much to feed. Jake felt his heart break for these children. He looked around the alley and realized that he could not just leave them here. Their father had already abandoned them, and there was no telling what other predators might find them if he walked away. The station had no real child protection services, and 3 alien children on their own would not survive long. He made a decision that would change his life forever. He told Zara that he would take care of them and that they would be safe on his ship. Zara translated for her sisters, and all 3 children looked at him with hope for the first time since he had seen them. Jake led the 3 girls through the station toward his ship. They walked close together, holding hands and staying near his side. Other people in the corridors stared at the unusual group, but Jake ignored them. When they reached the Wanderer, he realized that his cargo ship was not designed for passengers, especially not children, but he would make it work somehow. As the station grew smaller behind them, Jake looked at the 3 sleeping children curled up together on a makeshift bed in his cargo hold. He had no idea how to raise human children, much less alien ones, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never let anyone hurt them again. 3 months had passed since Jake found the 3 girls on Nexus Station, and life aboard the Wanderer had changed completely. What used to be a simple cargo hauler was now a makeshift home for a very unusual family. Jake had converted half of his cargo hold into living space for Zara, Luna, and Nova. He installed sleeping pods, privacy screens, and even managed to find child-sized furniture at a trading post near the Centauri colonies. The girls were slowly adjusting to their new life, but it was not easy for any of them. Jake quickly learned that raising alien children was much more complicated than he had expected. Their dietary needs were different from humans, and finding the right food was often a challenge. They needed certain minerals that were not found in standard human rations, and they could not eat many foods that were perfectly safe for humans. Zara had become the unofficial translator and caretaker for her younger sisters. At 10 years old, she was already carrying more responsibility than any child should have to bear. She would wake up early to help Jake prepare breakfast and would spend much of her time making sure Luna and Nova were comfortable. Jake could see the weight of protecting her sisters in her eyes, and it worried him. Luna, the middle child at 8 years old, had become very quiet since leaving the station. She rarely spoke even to her sisters, and would often sit staring out the viewports at the stars for hours. When she did speak, it was usually in their native Zephyrian language and only to Zara. Jake had tried to engage her in conversation, but she would just look at him with sad eyes and turn away. Nova, the youngest at 6 years old, cried often and had nightmares almost every night. She would wake up screaming for her mother, and it would take both Zara and Jake to calm her down. During the day she was clingy and would not let Jake or her sisters out of her sight for long. She had developed a habit of humming a soft melody that Zara said was a lullaby their mother used to sing. Jake found himself learning about Zephyrian culture through trial and error. The girls were sensitive to bright artificial light, so he had to adjust the ship lighting to a softer blue tone. They needed more sleep than human children, and they had different social customs that he was still trying to understand. Sometimes they would touch their foreheads together and seem to communicate without words, which made Jake wonder if they had some kind of telepathic ability. The language barrier was slowly improving. Zara was becoming fluent in Standard and was teaching her sisters. Luna understood much more than she spoke, while Nova was picking up basic words and phrases. Jake was also trying to learn some Zephyrian words, which the girls found amusing. His pronunciation was terrible, but they appreciated the effort. It was during a supply stop at Frontier Station that Jake met Dr. Helen Carter. She was a xenobiologist who had served with him during his military days, and she was one of the few people he trusted completely. When she saw the three girls, she immediately understood that Jake needed help. Dr. Carter examined each of the girls thoroughly, and her findings were both fascinating and concerning. All three children showed signs of psychic development which was normal for their species, but much stronger than usual. Zara had empathic abilities that allowed her to sense emotions and intentions. Luna showed telekinetic potential and had already been unconsciously moving small objects. Nova had precognitive flashes that manifested as dreams and intuitive warnings. The doctor explained that these abilities made the girls extremely valuable to certain groups. Military organizations wanted psychic soldiers who could read enemy minds. Corporations wanted psychic spies who could steal secrets without detection. Criminal organizations wanted psychic assassins who could kill without leaving evidence. Dr. Carter warned Jake that keeping the girls safe would become increasingly difficult as their abilities developed. She helped. Jake obtained forged documentation that listed him as the girls' legal guardian. The paperwork would not hold up under serious scrutiny, but it would be enough for routine checks and minor bureaucracy. She also gave him medical supplies, specifically designed for Zephyrian physiology, and taught him how to recognize signs of illness or distress in the children. More importantly, Dr. Carter spent time talking to each of the girls individually. She had experience treating trauma in alien children, and she could see that all three were still processing the abandonment by their father. She taught Jake techniques for helping them feel safe and secure while also respecting their cultural needs. The changes in the girls after Dr. Carter's visit were gradual but noticeable. Zara began to relax slightly and started asking Jake questions about human culture and customs. She was curious about everything from human food to human holidays. She also began calling him Papa Jake, which made his heart swell as unexpected. Emotion. Luna started speaking more often, though still mainly to her sisters. She had developed an interest in the ship's mechanical systems and would watch Jake perform maintenance tasks with intense focus. She had gentle hands and seemed to instinctively understand how delicate equipment worked. Jake began teaching her basic engineering concepts, which she absorbed quickly. Nova was still the most fragile emotionally, but she had moments of genuine happiness. She loved when Jake told her stories about the different planets he had visited, and she would draw pictures of the places he described. Her drawings were surprisingly detailed and accurate even for places she had never seen. Jake wondered if her precognitive abilities were helping her visualize these distant worlds. The three girls had also begun to show their individual personalities more clearly. Zara was the natural leader, protective and responsible, but also curious about everything around her. Luna was quiet and thoughtful, with an analytical mind that seemed perfectly suited for technical work. Nova was creative and intuitive with an artistic soul that expressed itself through drawings, songs, and stories. Jake found himself becoming deeply attached to all three girls. He had never wanted children of his own, and had always assumed he was not cut out for parenthood. but watching Zara help Luna with her reading lessons or seeing Nova laugh at one of his bad jokes made him realize that family was not always about blood relations. Sometimes family was about choosing to love and protect each other. The girls were also bonding with him in ways that surprised him. They had started leaving little gifts in his quarters, things like drawings or small objects they had found interesting. They would ask him about his day and listen intently to his stories about life before he found them. When he had been sick with a minor fever, all three girls had taken turns bringing him food and checking on him throughout the day. Jake knew that their peaceful life could not last forever. He had already noticed increased security sweeps at the stations they visited, and there had been inquiries about ships carrying alien passengers. Someone somewhere was looking for 3 Zephyrian children, and it was only a matter of time before they were found. He made the decision to head for the Outer Rim territories where law enforcement was lighter and questions were fewer. It would mean longer supply runs and less comfortable accommodations, but it would also mean more safety for his new family. As he plotted a course for the frontier worlds, Jake looked back at the 3 girls, who were playing a quiet game together in their living area. He had started this journey as a simple cargo pilot with no attachments and no responsibilities beyond his next paycheck. Now he was a father to 3 extraordinary children who depended on him for everything. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time, and Jake knew that he would do anything to keep them safe. 6 months after Jake had rescued the girls from Nexus Station, their quiet life came to a violent end. They had docked at Frontier Station for supplies and repairs when everything went wrong. Jake was in the market buying food when he heard the sound of weapons fire coming from the direction of his ship. He ran through the crowded station corridors, pushing past startled traders and dock workers. When he reached the docking bay, he saw armed figures in black combat suits surrounding the Wanderer. They were not station security, and they were not pirates. These were professional soldiers with expensive equipment, and they were trying to break into his ship. Jake could hear the girls screaming from inside the ship, and his blood turned cold. He pulled out his sidearm and took cover behind a cargo container. He counted at least 8 attackers, all carrying non-lethal stun weapons. They were not trying to kill the girls, they were trying to capture them alive. As Jake tried to figure out how to reach his ship, something incredible happened. The attackers suddenly stumbled backward, clutching their heads as if they were in terrible pain. Through the ship windows, Jake could see Zara standing with her hands pressed to her temples. Her eyes were glowing brighter than he had ever seen. Them and the air around her seemed to shimmer. The oldest girl was using her empathic abilities as a weapon projecting fear and confusion into the minds of their attackers. The men in black suits were writhing on the ground, overwhelmed by emotions that were not their own. Some were crying, others were screaming, and all of them had dropped their weapons. Luna appeared at another window, and Jake watched in amazement as cargo containers and repair tools began flying through the air. The 8-year-old girl was using her telekinetic powers to turn the entire docking bay into a whirlwind of improvised weapons. Metal pipes struck the attackers, while tool boxes created barriers between the girls and their enemies. Nova, the youngest, was standing beside her sisters with her eyes closed in concentration. She was speaking rapidly in Zephyrian and pointing in different directions. Jake realized she was using her precognitive abilities to warn her sisters about attacks before they happened. The 3 girls were working as a perfect team using their psychic powers in ways Jake had never imagined possible, but the girls were still children, and the effort of using their abilities was taking a toll. Jake could see Zara swaying on her feet, while Luna was breathing heavily from the strain of moving so many objects at once. He had to help them before they exhausted themselves. Jake broke from cover and opened fire on the attackers. His military training took over as he moved from position to position, keeping the enemy pinned down while working his way toward his ship. The combination of his weapons fire and the girl's psychic assault was too much for the attackers. They began retreating toward the station exit, dragging their wounded with them. One of the attackers stopped to fire a shot at Jake as he ran toward the ship. The energy bolt caught him in the shoulder and spun him around. He hit the deck hard and felt blood soaking through his shirt. Through blurred vision, he saw Zara appear in the ship doorway, her face twisted with rage. The girl let out a scream that was more emotion than sound, and the attacking soldier collapsed as if he had been struck by lightning. The remaining attackers fled the docking bay, leaving their unconscious comrade behind. Jake struggled to his feet and stumbled into the ship where all three girls rushed to help him. The next few hours were a blur of medical treatment and questions from station security. Commander Lisa Park arrived with a full investigation team, and Jake learned that his attackers had been corporate mercenaries working for Helix Corporation. Someone had leaked information about the girls' abilities, and the corporation wanted to acquire them for their psychic research program. Jake was treated for his wound in the station medical bay, while the girls stayed close to his side. They were shaken by the violence, but also proud of how they had protected their family. Zara kept apologizing for using her powers as a weapon, while Luna worried that she had hurt someone with her telekinesis. Nova was having visions of more attacks coming, and she clung to Jake's arm as she tried to describe what she was seeing. Commander Park was sympathetic, but she made it clear that Frontier Station could not protect them from future attacks. Helix Corporation had unlimited resources, and they would not give up easily. She suggested that Jake contact his old military connections for help. Jake made a secure communication to Colonel Frank Hayes, who had been his commanding officer during the war. Hayes now worked for an organization that protected alien refugees from exploitation and trafficking. When Jake explained the situation, Hayes immediately understood the danger they were facing. The colonel told Jake about Haven Colony, a hidden settlement where humans and aliens lived together in safety. The colony was protected by advanced shielding technology and a volunteer defense force made up of former military personnel from a dozen different species. It was exactly the kind of place where the girls could grow up normally while learning to control their abilities. But getting to Haven Colony would not be easy. The location was a closely guarded secret, and the journey would take them through dangerous territory, where Helix Corporation ships were already searching for them. Hayes agreed to provide escort ships and a new identity beacon for the Wanderer. But Jake would have to trust him completely. The girls listened quietly as Jake explained their options. They could try to reach Haven Colony, where they might find safety and others like them, or they could continue running from station to station, always looking over their shoulders. It was not really a choice at all. Zara spoke for all three of them when she said they wanted to go to Haven Colony. She was tired of being afraid and tired of hiding what they were. Luna nodded in agreement and added that she wanted to learn how to use her abilities to help people instead of hurt them. Nova said she had seen glimpses of a beautiful place in her dreams, and she thought it might be their new home. Jake felt a mixture of hope and fear as they prepared to leave Frontier Station. The attack had shown him just how powerful the girls were becoming, but it had also shown him how much danger they were in. Helix Corporation would not stop hunting them, and there would be other organizations with similar interests. As they undocked from the station, Jake looked back at his three daughters who were strapped into emergency seats in the cockpit. 6 months ago, they had been terrified, abandoned children who could barely speak standard. Now they were confident young girls who had used their extraordinary abilities to save their family from attack. Zara caught him looking and smiled. She said Papa Jake in her accented English and reached over to squeeze his uninjured hand. Luna was studying the navigation charts with intense concentration, while Nova was drawing pictures of their destination based on her visions. Jake realized that they were no longer just running from danger, they were running toward something better. Haven Colony represented hope for a normal life, where the girls could be themselves without fear. He set course for the coordinates Hayes had given him, and hoped they would reach safety before Helix Corporation found them again. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but Jake was no longer facing it alone. He had 3 extraordinary daughters who would fight beside him, and a network of allies who understood what they were going through. For the first time since the attack, Jake allowed himself to believe that they might actually find the peace and safety they were looking for. The stars ahead looked brighter as the Wanderer jumped to hyperspace, carrying its precious cargo toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Haven Colony was more beautiful than Jake had dared to imagine. As the Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace, he saw a lush green world with blue oceans and white clouds floating in its atmosphere. The planet called New Eden looked like something from a paradise postcard, and Jake could hardly believe that such a perfect place existed in the dangerous Outer Rim territories. The colony itself was built into a series of valleys surrounded by gentle mountains. From orbit, Jake could see the shimmer of energy shields that protected the settlement from detection and attack. Gardens and parks were scattered throughout the residential areas, while larger buildings housed schools, workshops, and community centers. It looked more like a vacation resort than a refuge for displaced beings. Colonel Hayes met them at the landing pad with a welcoming committee that included beings from at least a dozen different species. The girls pressed their faces to the viewport, windows staring in wonder at their new home. There were human children playing with alien children in nearby parks, and the sight filled Jake with hope. Director Paul Jackson was a tall, friendly man who had founded Haven Colony 15 years earlier. He explained that the settlement was home to over 3,000 residents representing dozens of species from across the galaxy. Many were refugees like themselves who had fled persecution or exploitation. Others were simply families who wanted to live in peace away from the conflicts that plagued the inner worlds. The girls were amazed by everything they saw as Jackson gave them a tour of the colony. The houses were built in different architectural styles to accommodate the needs of various species. The central plaza featured a fountain that created rainbow patterns in the sunlight, while vendors sold food and crafts from their homeworlds. Children of all shapes, sizes, and colors ran through the streets, laughing and playing together. Jake was assigned a comfortable house on the edge of the residential district with enough room for him and the 3 girls to have their own private spaces. The house came fully furnished and had a small garden where the girls could play safely. For the first time since leaving Nexus Station, they had a real home instead of just a ship cabin. The girls enrolled in the colony school the next day and met their teacher, Maria Santos. She was a human woman with extensive experience helping children with psychic abilities learn control and confidence. The school had special classes for telepaths, empaths, and precognitive students where they could develop their skills in a supportive environment. Zara thrived in this new setting. She made friends quickly with other children who had protective instincts, and she began training with the Colony Defense Force. Captain Sandra Lee taught her how to use her empathic abilities, constructively helping resolve conflicts and providing emotional support to others in need. The 10-year-old girl was becoming a natural leader who inspired confidence in everyone around her. Luna found her voice again in art therapy classes. She discovered that she could use her telekinetic abilities to sculpt clay and shape metal in ways that ordinary tools could not achieve. Her artwork was beautiful and complex, showing scenes from her memories of home, as well as her hopes for the future. She also excelled in engineering classes where her intuitive understanding of mechanical systems impressed her teachers. Nova blossomed in the creative arts program. Her precognitive abilities helped her avoid accidents and solve problems before they became serious. She used her visions to create detailed paintings of places She had never seen and wrote stories about adventures that had not yet happened. The 6-year-old girl was becoming known throughout the colony for her cheerful personality and helpful nature. Jake found work as a shuttle pilot, ferrying supplies and passengers between the colony and nearby trading posts. The job paid well and allowed him to spend plenty of time with the girls. He also began a relationship with Dr. Rebecca Stone, a human psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery for alien children. Rebecca helped Jake understand the psychological healing that had been taking place in his daughters over the past months. She explained that his love, consistency, and protection had given them the security they needed to process their abandonment trauma. The girls had formed strong attachment bonds with him, and now saw him as their true father rather than just there. Rescuer. Life in Haven Colony was peaceful and fulfilling, but Jake knew it was too good to last. His fears were confirmed when colony intelligence reported that Cultex, the girl's biological father, had been bragging about trading away psychic weapons while drunk in various spaceport bars. Worse, he had been approached by Helix Corporation agents, who were offering him money for information about his daughters. Current location. The colony leadership held emergency meetings to discuss the threat. Defense Chief Captain Lay estimated that they had perhaps 2 weeks before Helix Corporation ships arrived in the system. The advanced shielding technology could hide the colony from casual observation, but it would not stop a determined search by corporate military forces. Director Jackson made the difficult decision to begin evacuation procedures. The most vulnerable residents, including families with young children, would be relocated to other safe havens throughout the Outer Rim. The Defense Force would remain behind to protect the colony and hopefully convince the attackers that it was just another abandoned settlement. Jake faced a terrible choice. He could take the girls and evacuate with the other families, keeping them safe, but forcing them back into a life of constant running. Or he could stay and fight, risking their lives, but potentially ending the threat permanently. The decision was too important to make alone, so he called a family meeting. The 3 girls listened carefully as Jake explained the situation. Helix Corporation was coming, and they had to decide whether to run or make a stand. He told them that both choices were dangerous and that he would support whatever decision they made together. Zara spoke first. She said she was tired of running and tired of letting fear control their lives. She wanted to help protect Haven Colony and all the other families who had found safety there. She said she was not afraid to use her abilities to fight people who wanted to hurt children. Luna agreed quietly. She said she would not let bad people destroy their home or hurt other children like them. She had been practicing with her telekinetic abilities, and she believed she could make a real difference in defending the colony. She also said she trusted Papa Jake to keep them safe. Nova closed her eyes and concentrated for a moment. When she opened them again, she smiled and said she had seen visions of their victory. She could not see all the details, but she knew they would win if they worked together and trusted each other. She said the colony would be safe and they would help many more children in the future. Jake felt proud and terrified at the same time. His 3 daughters had grown from frightened refugees into confident young girls who were willing to fight for what they believed in. They had chosen to make a stand, and he would support them no matter what happened. The next 2 weeks were spent in intensive preparation. The girls trained with the Defense Force, learning how to coordinate their psychic abilities with conventional weapons and tactics. Jake worked with the technical teams to modify the colony shields and weapon systems. Every resident who stayed behind had a role to play in the coming battle. As Helix Corporation ships appeared at the edge of the system, Jake gathered his 3 daughters for what might be their last quiet moment together. He told them how proud he was of the young women they were becoming and how much they meant to him. They hugged him tightly and promised that no matter what happened, they would always be a family. The battle for Haven Colony was about to begin. and Jake knew that their lives would never be the same again. But looking at Zara, Luna, and Nova, he felt confident that they were ready for whatever came next. They had found their home, and they were prepared to defend it with everything they had. The Helix Corporation fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. Executive Director Richard Kane commanded 12 heavy cruisers and 30 smaller attack ships, all bristling with weapons and boarding pods. He had brought over 2,000 mercenaries and corporate soldiers to capture 3 young girls, and he was confident that nothing could stop him. Jake watched the approaching ships from the Colony Command Center, where Director Jackson was coordinating. The defense. Haven Colony had only 6 patrol ships and a few hundred volunteers, but they had advantages that Kane did not know about. The girls were not helpless victims anymore, and they had learned to use their abilities in ways their enemies could never. Expect. Zara stood beside Jake, wearing the uniform of a junior defense officer. At 11 years old, she looked small and young, but her eyes held the determination of someone much older. She had spent weeks training with Captain Lee and the other defenders, learning how to project her empathic abilities across vast distances. She was ready to coordinate the entire defense, using her psychic connections with every volunteer. Luna was in the technical center with a team of engineers. The 9-year-old girl had become an expert at using her telekinetic powers to manipulate complex machinery and electronic systems. She could disable enemy weapons, reprogram computers, and even pilot remote drones using only her mind. The engineers treated her as an equal and trusted her completely. Nova was in the communication room with Maria Santos and other teachers. The 7-year-old girl was using her precognitive abilities to track the enemy movements and predict their tactics. She could see glimpses of the battle before it happened, and her warnings had already saved dozens of lives during the preparation phase. Kane opened communication channels and demanded the immediate surrender of the 3 Zephyrian children. He promised that the colony would be spared if they cooperated, and threatened complete destruction if they resisted. Director Jackson responded that Haven Colony protected all its children and would never hand them over to corporate slavers. The battle began with a massive bombardment that lit up the colony shields like a fireworks display. The energy barriers held, but Jake could see them flickering under the sustained assault. Kane was using overwhelming firepower to try to break through the defenses quickly, but he was underestimating the determination of the people he was attacking. Zara closed her eyes and reached out with her empathic abilities. She could feel the emotions of every defender in the colony, and she began linking them together into a unified fighting force. Fear and doubt were replaced with courage and determination as her psychic influence spread through the defense network. The volunteers fought with the coordination of a professional army. Luna focused her telekinetic powers on the enemy fleet. She could not move entire starships, but she could manipulate their weapon systems and navigation computers. Enemy missiles suddenly changed course and struck other enemy ships, while targeting systems malfunctioned at critical moments. The corporate fleet found itself fighting against its own equipment. Nova guided the colony defenders by warning them of attacks before they happened. She could see enemy boarding parties preparing to launch and told the defenders exactly where they would try to land. She could predict which shield generators would fail and gave repair teams time to strengthen them. Her visions turned the chaotic battle into a carefully orchestrated defense. Jake led a strike team that launched from the colony in 3 small ships. Their mission was to reach Kane Command vessel and disable it from the inside. The girls supported him across space, using their psychic bond to share information and coordinate attacks. He had never felt so connected to his daughters or so confident in their abilities. The boarding action was fierce but brief. Jake and his team fought their way through the corporate ship, while Luna used her powers to shut down bulkhead doors and weapon systems. Zara projected fear and confusion into the minds of enemy soldiers, while Nova warned Jake about ambushes and traps. The three girls working together made his small team nearly unstoppable. Kane was waiting in his command center with a squad of elite guards. He was a cold, calculating man who saw the girls as valuable research subjects rather than living beings. When Jake confronted him, Kane laughed and said that capturing psychic children was just business and that he would never stop hunting them. The battle reached its climax when Nova had a vision showing her how to end the conflict without massive casualties. She shared the vision with her sisters, who immediately understood what needed to be done. The three girls joined their psychic abilities together and reached out toward the enemy fleet with power beyond anything they had ever attempted. Zara projected overwhelming guilt into the minds of every corporate soldier, making them remember every cruel thing they had ever done and feel genuine remorse for their actions. Luna used her telekinesis to overload the computer systems on every enemy ship, simultaneously creating cascading failures throughout the fleet. Nova guided their combined assault with perfect timing that prevented any chance of recovery or counterattack. The corporate fleet was crippled in moments. Ships lost power navigation and life support as their systems failed one after another. Emergency evacuation procedures activated automatically, and thousands of soldiers abandoned their ships in escape pods. Kane himself was overwhelmed by Zara, empathic assault and collapsed writhing as he experienced every moment of fear and pain his victims had ever felt. The battle was over, but the girls paid a heavy price for their victory. Using their abilities on such a massive scale had drained them completely. They collapsed unconscious and had to be rushed to the medical center, where Dr. Stone worked frantically to stabilize their condition. Jake stayed by their side, praying that they would recover from the ordeal. When the girls finally woke up 3 days later, they were weak but otherwise unharmed. They had proven that psychic abilities, guided by love and moral principles, were far more powerful than those driven by greed and hatred. More importantly, they had shown that working together as a family made them stronger than any corporation or military force. Haven Colony was rebuilt and expanded in the months that followed. Other settlements requested help protecting their own vulnerable children, and the girls began training young psychics in both power and responsibility. They taught that having special abilities did not make someone superior, but rather gave them the duty to protect those who could not protect themselves.